"Get out of my city, you worthless piece of trash." Those were the words that Sergeant Mike Thompson spat out as he shoved a homeless man onto the hot pavement outside the Oakwood Police Precinct. The crowd nearby froze. A few officers laughed quietly. Others looked away. The man didn't speak. He simply looked up, his face calm beneath a scruffy beard, eyes steady and unflinching. No one there knew the truth, that the man they were mocking was their brand new police chief. Before going into the story, I want to know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you believe in justice and change, because what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. 2 hours earlier, James Harlan had stepped out of his car and into another world. The heat of the June morning hung thick in the air, and the old precinct loomed ahead, a relic of Oakwood's past, with cracks running down its gray walls like scars that refused to heal. James wore ragged clothes, a torn jacket, and a wool cap pulled low to hide his face. To everyone else, he looked like a man forgotten by time. But behind those weary eyes was the sharp focus of a seasoned leader. He wasn't there for pity. He was there for truth. For months. James had read complaints about this precinct, allegations of racial profiling, excessive force, and falsified reports. 12 complaints were linked to one man, Sergeant Mike Thompson. The name had appeared in nearly every internal review that crossed James's desk since he took office. But he didn't want secondhand reports or staged patrol briefings. He wanted the unfiltered reality of what his officers had become. As he lingered near the parking lot, pretending to rummage through a trash bin, he overheard two voices from behind the patrol cars. Tyrone Brooks, his old friend from the academy, spoke quietly to Officer Lisa Grant. "We can't keep running the district like this," Tyrone said. "People out there don't trust us anymore." Lisa's voice was sharp, full of arrogance. "They don't need to trust us. They need to obey us, control the streets, and the numbers will fall back in line." That line cut deep. Control the streets. It wasn't about safety. It was about domination. About power. James clenched his fists but said nothing. He'd seen this before. The same kind of thinking that had once put him in handcuffs for a crime he never committed. He remembered that night clearly, even after 30 years. He was 16, walking home in South Chicago, when two white officers accused him of stealing a bike. He didn't even own one. They threw him on the hood of a patrol car, pressed his face against the metal, and called him boy. His mother's scream still echoed in his memory. That moment had defined him, not as a victim, but as a man determined to change the system that broke him. And now, standing here, he realized how deep those roots of prejudice still ran. A few minutes later, Mike Thompson appeared, broad-shouldered, gray hair buzzed short, sunglasses hiding eyes that had long forgotten compassion. He was everything the old Oakwood force stood for, authority without empathy. Thompson spotted James from across the lot, sneering as he walked closer. "You lost, old man?" James stayed silent, head bowed. Thompson's voice grew louder. I said, "Are you lost? You don't belong here." He kicked a paper cup toward James, who didn't flinch. The silence seemed to challenge him. Thompson's temper flared. He leaned in, spit landing on James's cheek, then shoved him to the ground. "You're filth in my city. Remember that. For a moment." Time stopped. Tyrone stood nearby, frozen, torn between speaking out and keeping his job. James caught a glimpse of him, their eyes locking for half a second. Tyrone's guilt was written all over his face. James slowly rose, brushing the dust from his jacket, every movement deliberate. He said nothing. But inside, his heart pounded with the rhythm of old pain and renewed purpose. Hidden inside his jacket was a small body camera, recording every word, every cruel gesture. It wasn't rage that filled him. It was clarity. This was the proof he needed. He lingered a little longer, Watching the rhythm of the precinct from the outside, officers laughed in clusters, smoking by their cruisers. A young recruit handed Thompson a clipboard, only to be scolded for being soft. Lisa Grant joined in with an easy smile, praising Thompson's leadership. James noted the smirks, the dismissive comments about quota calls and black neighborhoods. It was all there, the culture of arrogance and fear he had sworn to dismantle. Then, a commotion stirred by the gate. A patrol car rolled in, dragging behind it a young black man in handcuffs. The boy couldn't have been more than 18, terrified, pleading that he hadn't done anything. Thompson shouted over him, "You matched the description. That's all I need." The boy's voice cracked. "I was just going home." James turned away, hiding his trembling hands. It was the same scene, decades later. Only now he was in a position to stop it. He had seen enough. As he moved toward the back entrance of the building, he overheard Lisa whispering to Thompson, "We should keep an eye on Brooks. He's been questioning things lately." Thompson snorted. "If he steps out of line, I'll handle him myself." James's eyes narrowed. Tyrone's silence wasn't cowardice. It was survival. He was a man caught between two worlds, the one he'd sworn to serve and the one that no longer trusted him. By the time the noon sun hit its peak, James had gathered everything he needed. The footage showed Thompson's brutality, the officer's indifference, the mocking jokes about race and authority. It was ugly, but it was real. He slipped away from the alley, removed the cap from his head, and looked toward the precinct doors with quiet determination. The time for observation was over. Now came the moment of truth. Inside. The atmosphere shifted when he entered. Officers glanced at him curiously. This stranger walking with confidence through the halls they thought they ruled. A young officer tried to stop him, but James kept moving, straight toward the briefing room where Lieutenant Elena Vargas was preparing to meet the staff. He could already hear Thompson's voice echoing through the corridor, laughing about some bum outside. James paused at the door, exhaled slowly, and whispered under his breath, "Let's begin." The doors opened, sunlight flooding the room. Conversations stopped. Every head turned. And there he stood, the man they'd insulted, shoved, and humiliated, now clean-shaven, in uniform, badge gleaming on his chest. The nameplate read, Chief James Harlan. The shock rippled through the room like an explosion. Thompson's smirk vanished. Lisa's jaw dropped. Tyrone looked down, eyes full of shame and relief. James's voice was calm but firm. "I was outside this morning. I saw everything, and I recorded everything. Now, we're going to talk about what really happens in this department." The room went silent, every breath heavy with realization, for the first time. Power shifted, not by force, but by truth. And as James placed his phone on the table, the evidence glowing on screen, one thought burned in his mind. This was just the beginning. The silence that filled the briefing room after James's revelation was heavier than any sound. Officers shifted in their seats, some stunned, others defiant. Sergeant Mike Thompson's face turned pale beneath his tan, his arrogance cracking like thin glass. Lisa Grant glanced at him nervously, realizing their game had just changed. Tyrone Brooks, seated near the back, clenched his fists under the table. He'd known this day would come. But not like this. James stood tall at the front, his voice steady yet filled with controlled anger. "I came here to see who you are when no one's watching, and what I saw." He paused, letting his eyes move from Thompson to the others. Wasn't policing. It was prejudice wearing a badge. The words hit like a hammer. A few younger officers lowered their heads, ashamed. Others whispered to each other, afraid of what might come next. James pressed play on his phone. The footage appeared on the large screen behind him. Thompson's voice blared through the speakers. "You're filth in my city!" Gasps spread across the room. Lisa tried to interrupt. "Chief, that footage." But James raised a hand. "It's real. Officer Grant. Every word, every gesture, every second. This department is broken, and I'm not here to patch it up. I'm here to rebuild it." When the video ended, no one spoke. The truth had stripped the room bare, but the silence didn't last. Thompson slammed his hands on the table. "You come in here, undercover, recording your own officers? You're not leading us. You're betraying us." His voice shook with rage. James met his glare calmly. "If truth feels like betrayal, maybe you've been lying to yourself for too long." Lieutenant Elena Vargas, who had watched quietly until now, stood up. "Enough," she said firmly. "Chief Harlan is right. We've had too many complaints, too many community protests. It's time we face this." Her tone carried authority, but beneath it was exhaustion. A woman tired of fighting the same battles inside and outside the department. After the meeting, tension rippled through the building like a storm moving through steel. Some officers avoided James entirely, whispering in corners. Others eyed him with cautious respect. Tyrone followed him back to his office, closing the door behind them. "James," he said softly, "you didn't have to do it this way." James sat behind his desk, expression unreadable. "There was no other way. I had to see what kind of men I was leading." Tyrone hesitated. "Mike's not going to let this go. You humiliated him. Lisa, too. They'll come after you." James leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Then let them. The truth doesn't fear exposure. Corruption does." As Tyrone left, his phone buzzed. An anonymous text appeared. "Watch your back. You picked the wrong side." He looked around but saw no one. The paranoia crept in, the kind that made you question even the walls. Meanwhile, in the locker room, Thompson and Lisa were already plotting. Thompson's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. "He thinks he can embarrass me? I've been here 25 years. He'll be gone before next month." Lisa crossed her arms. "He's got the mayor behind him, Mike. If we want him out, we have to make it look like he's the problem." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "You mean?" "Exactly. We find something, anything, a misstep, a falsified report, an ethics complaint. We leak it to the press. Paint him as a radical." Thompson smirked, a cruel glint returning to his face. "Then we'll bury him under his own righteousness." By the next morning, whispers spread like wildfire through the precinct. "Did you hear the new chief was spying on us? They say he planted cameras. He's trying to get good officers fired." Lies mixed with fear until truth became almost irrelevant. James noticed the shift immediately. Conversations stopped when he entered. Eyes darted away. Even the new recruits seemed wary. Yet he stayed composed, reviewing reports, calling for data on officer conduct and complaint rates. What he saw was alarming. 3 times as many arrests of black residents compared to whites. Even in neighborhoods with similar crime rates. It wasn't bad policing. It was systemic bias. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Vargas came into his office. "Chief, I thought you should see this." She handed him a file marked "Confidential." 2022 assault case. Inside were statements from a young black man named DeAndre Collins, who claimed Thompson had beaten him during a stop, then falsified the report to justify it. The case had been dismissed for lack of evidence. James frowned. "Who signed off on this?" "Grant," Vargas replied quietly. "She was the reporting officer." James leaned back, connecting the dots. So, they've been protecting each other for years. Outside, the air was thick with unrest. News trucks lined the streets somehow. Word had already leaked about James's undercover stunt. The media painted him as a radical reformer. Some praised his courage. Others, especially conservative outlets, called him a race agitator inside the precinct. Thompson fed that narrative. He gathered a few loyal officers, convincing them James was turning the department into a political circus. He warned that budget cuts and federal oversight would follow. Fear did the rest that night. As James worked late, he received an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "You should have stayed in Chicago." Attached was a photo, a surveillance shot of him leaving his house that morning. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly locked his office door. The threats weren't just professional now, they were personal. He called Tyrone. "They're moving faster than I expected," he said. Tyrone sighed heavily. "You should know. Lisa's been spreading word that you tampered with internal data. Some of the officers are buying it." "Let her," James replied calmly. "The truth always leaves footprints, and I'm tracking every one of hers." Meanwhile, Tyrone's conflict deepened. He believed in James's mission, but his wife had warned him, "If you get caught up in his war, we'll lose everything." The fear of losing his job and his home gnawed at him, but the image of Thompson spitting on James replayed in his mind, burning away the fear bit by bit. The next morning, Lisa cornered Tyrone in the hallway. "You think you're some kind of hero? Backing him up?" she sneered. "He's going to drag you down with him." Tyrone met her gaze. "At least I'll fall on the right side of history." Her smile vanished. "Careful. Brooks, you've got a family. Accidents happen in this job." When she walked away, Tyrone realized she wasn't bluffing. The line between intimidation and threat had already been crossed by the end of the week. Tension turned into chaos. An internal report appeared on social media, claiming James had used city funds for personal surveillance equipment. It was a lie. But it caught fire online. Protests formed outside the precinct, some demanding justice, others demanding his resignation. James stood by his office window, watching the crowd chant his name in both anger and support. Tyrone entered, holding his phone. "Mike and Lisa are the leak," he said quietly. "They're using a private server to move falsified reports. I can get you proof. But if they catch me..." James turned to him. "Then don't get caught. But remember, Tyrone, every reform starts with someone willing to risk something." As the evening descended, James gathered his evidence, preparing for what came next. The battle for truth had begun in secret, but now it was spilling into the open. And just as he was about to leave for the night, a news alert flashed across the screen. Breaking: Oakwood Police Chief under fire for internal espionage allegations. He stared at it, a weary sigh escaping his chest. They had declared war. He reached for his phone, opened the video file of Thompson's assault once more, and whispered, "If they want a fight, they'll get one." The next morning, the city would wake to headlines, division, and outrage. But for James Harlan, the real war wasn't in the streets. It was within the walls of his own precinct. By the time the morning briefing began, tension in the Oakwood precinct could be felt in the air like static before a storm. Officers stood in clusters, whispering as James Harlan entered the room. Cameras from local news outlets were already stationed outside, waiting for the radical chief to make a statement. The department's reputation was crumbling by the hour, and everyone knew it. But James wasn't there to defend himself. He was there to confront the truth. Face to face, Lieutenant Elena Vargas called the meeting to order, her tone sharp. "All personnel present," she said. Glancing toward James, "Chief Harlan requested this meeting. Let's hear him out." James stepped forward, calm but resolute. "I know many of you have heard the rumors, that I came here to destroy this department, that I used city funds for personal surveillance, that I've betrayed my own officers." He paused, letting his eyes move across the room. None of that is true. But what is true is much worse. He tapped a remote, and the screen behind him flickered to life. A video began to play, one that no one had seen before. It showed Sergeant Mike Thompson in a dark alley behind the precinct 2 years earlier, striking a handcuffed young man while Officer Lisa Grant falsified a report beside him, the timestamp, body cam metadata, and witness audio were undeniable. Gasps filled the room. A few officers stood up instinctively, faces pale. James continued, voice steady but filled with controlled fury. This case was dismissed as lack of evidence. The victim's name was DeAndre Collins. He was 18. He still walks with a limp. And the officers responsible for that cover-up are standing right here. Thompson's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. James turned toward him. I know exactly what I'm talking about. You've been falsifying reports, intimidating witnesses, and protecting your own circle for years. You've turned this precinct into a shield for corruption. Lisa's face went cold, her voice trembling with forced confidence. This is slander. Chief, you have no right. I have every right. James cut in sharply. I'm the chief of this department, and as of today, Sergeant Thompson, you're on immediate suspension pending internal and federal review. The room fell silent again. Thompson's eyes darted toward Vargas, expecting support, but she didn't move. Instead, she lowered her gaze and said quietly, the evidence is clear. Mike, you need to step down until this is resolved. For a brief moment. Thompson's facade cracked. His hands shook as he removed his badge from his chest, placing it on the table with a loud clink that echoed across the room. He leaned in close to James and muttered, You think this makes you a hero? You've got no idea who you're dealing with. James didn't flinch. Then enlighten me. Thompson smirked, a dark glimmer in his eyes. You just declared war on half this department? He walked out, slamming the door behind him. The sound reverberated through the building. James turned back to the others. If anyone here believes that accountability is an attack, then you're in the wrong profession. We don't serve our egos. We serve justice. For the first time. Tyrone Brooks stood up publicly, his voice steady but emotional. He's right. Thompson's been covering up things for years. I saw him threaten an officer who refused to alter an arrest report. I kept quiet because I was afraid of losing my job, my family, my pension. But I can't stay silent anymore. The room shifted. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded in quiet agreement. Tyrone's courage broke the silence that had suffocated the precinct for years. Lisa rose from her chair, fury flashing across her face. You're just trying to save yourself. Brooks, you were part of this. Tyrone faced her squarely. No. Lisa, I was part of your silence. There's a difference. A murmur spread through the room, and James knew the tide was turning. But the victory was short-lived. Within hours, the media got wind of the suspension. News vans flooded the streets outside the precinct. Headlines screamed, Oakwood police imploding, chief accused of creating chaos. A right-wing commentator on local radio claimed James was dividing the force along racial lines. The mayor's office called repeatedly, demanding calm, while community activists began gathering outside with signs that read, Justice for DeAndre and Clean the Precinct, inside. Chaos reigned. Half the officers were furious, claiming James had embarrassed them. The other half, quietly relieved, finally saw hope for change. The divide had never been so clear. By late afternoon, James held a press conference, under the hot sun. Dozens of microphones surrounded him as cameras rolled. Accountability isn't an attack, he said firmly. It's a responsibility. Oakwood deserves a department that protects, not intimidates, its citizens. I will not apologize for seeking the truth, a reporter shouted. Chief Harlan, is it true you posed as a homeless man to spy on your own officers? James didn't hesitate. I didn't spy on anyone. I observed. What I saw confirmed what too many already feared, that some of our officers had forgotten their oath. The crowd buzzed with questions, but James raised a hand. We can't reform what we refuse to admit is broken. This is not just a scandal. It's a reckoning. Back inside. Thompson sat in his car across the street, watching the press conference on his phone. His expression hardened as he muttered, "You'll regret this. Harlan." He opened his glove box, revealing a USB drive marked "Confidential." Inside were documents he'd been saving for years, evidence of misconduct, not to expose corruption, but to use it as leverage. He had dirt on nearly every senior officer, and he planned to use it. Later that night, James received another anonymous message. "They're coming for you." Attached was a screenshot, an internal email chain between Lisa and Thompson discussing alternative leadership options. It was a thinly veiled threat. James locked the door of his office and sat in silence. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of isolation pressing down. But then his phone buzzed again, this time from Tyrone. "Chief." The message read, "I've got something. Grant's been deleting old records from the internal database. Jamal Kendrick helped me track her access logs. We have proof." James smiled faintly for the first time that day. The younger detective, Jamal Kendrick, had been quietly helping him analyze evidence behind the scenes. He was only 28, but sharp and fearless. The kind of cop James wished he'd had as a mentor decades ago. He called Tyrone immediately. "Good work. Secure the files. Don't tell anyone else." Tyrone hesitated. "You think they'll stop?" "No," James said. "They'll escalate, which means we need to stay 2 steps ahead. Outside the precinct." The protests grew larger. Some carried signs supporting James, others calling for his removal. One young boy, Malik, the son of one of Thompson's past victims, stood at the front holding a cardboard sign that read, "Justice lives here." James watched from the window, eyes weary but determined. He whispered to himself, "They can twist my image. They can spread their lies, but they can't erase the truth." Just then, his phone rang again, an unknown number. He answered. A deep voice said, "Chief Harlan, this is Agent Ruiz with the Federal Civil Rights Division. We've reviewed your footage. We're opening a federal investigation into Oakwood PD. For a moment." James said nothing. The noise outside seemed to fade. The wheels of justice, slow as they were, had finally begun to move. "Thank you, Agent," James said quietly. "But be ready. They'll fight back." And as he hung up the phone, one thought echoed in his mind. The fight for reform had just become a national battle. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, the precinct prepared for the storm that was coming. By sunrise, Oakwood had become a battlefield of narratives. The media frenzy from the night before hadn't cooled. It had exploded. Every local and national outlet carried the same story. Police chief goes undercover. Sparks civil war within department. Talk shows debated whether James Harlan was a visionary or a reckless radical. The mayor's office issued a cautious statement supporting ongoing internal reviews. While the police union called for his suspension, protesters stood shoulder to shoulder outside the precinct, some chanting his name with hope, others shouting for his resignation. Inside those gray concrete walls, the air was suffocating with division, fear, and resentment. James arrived early, silent and focused. His eyes were tired, but his mind was clear. He knew that reform was never peaceful. It was war fought with truth and integrity. As he entered the precinct, conversations abruptly stopped. Some officers stood when he passed. Others turned their backs. Tyrone Brooks waited by his office door, holding a file. "Chief, you need to see this," he said in a low voice. "Grant and Thompson are working behind the scenes. They've been sending files to a private server. We traced the IP address. It's connected to an old law firm that used to represent the police union." James took the folder and skimmed it quickly. Inside were falsified records, arrest logs rewritten to hide misconduct, deleted complaint forms, and altered timestamps. "How long has this been going on?" he asked quietly. "Years," Tyrone replied. "But now they're using it to frame you. They inserted fake documents showing you authorized equipment purchases that don't exist." James closed the file and leaned back, eyes narrowing. "They're building a case against me," he said, "and they're hoping the media finishes the job before the truth does." Down the hall, Lisa Grant watched through the glass, whispering into her phone. "He's seen the file," she said. "We need to move faster. The narrative's slipping. On the other end." Thompson's voice was sharp and impatient. "Then make him look like a tyrant. Leak the footage of him losing his temper during that meeting last month. Cut the context. Tell the press he threatened his own staff. By noon, the story was everywhere." A 10-second clip of James raising his voice at a briefing was circulating online, captioned, "Chief Harlan loses control." Out of context, it looked like anger. In reality, it had been passion, a plea for reform. But online, truth didn't matter. Comments poured in, thousands of them, half calling him a hero, half branding him the next problem in blue. Lieutenant Vargas walked into his office mid-afternoon, visibly anxious. "Chief, the mayor's chief of staff just called. They want you to issue a public apology." "For what?" James asked. "For causing a citywide media crisis," she said softly. James chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "So, tell me." "Elena, I should apologize for telling the truth." She hesitated, torn between duty and respect. "The city's under pressure. James, you're making enemies with power. Thompson's got friends in the union, in the press, even in City Hall." He nodded. "Then they can all line up and face what's coming." That evening, James held another press conference, standing before a sea of microphones. "I'm not stepping down," he declared. "If doing my job costs me my title, so be it. But corruption doesn't get to hide behind a badge, not in Oakwood, not anywhere." His voice echoed across the plaza. The crowd erupted, half in applause, half in angry shouts. The city was now divided down the middle. Back inside the precinct, Tyrone found Detective Jamal Kendrick working late, eyes glued to his computer. "You're still here?" Tyrone asked. Jamal looked up. "I found something. Thompson deleted files from the precinct server 2 days before Chief Harlan arrived. But there's a backup. On the old patrol database, I'm restoring it." His fingers flew across the keyboard. On screen, lines of data reappeared, misconduct logs, falsified reports, and unedited footage from police body cams. "If we can cross-reference these, we can prove Thompson and Grant have been covering for half the precinct." Tyrone's face hardened. "Then let's make sure this never disappears again." But Lisa Grant was already several steps ahead. As she and 2 officers loyal to Thompson walked through the hallway, she whispered, "They're on to us. We'll need to shut down access tonight." She handed one officer a flash drive. "Upload this to the server. Make it look like Harlan planted evidence on Thompson's record to frame him." The officer hesitated. "That's a felony." "Lisa, so is losing your pension if this place collapses," she replied coldly. Later that night, the precinct's systems went dark. Servers froze, screens flickered. IT reported a data breach. By morning, the fake report had spread online. A major headline screamed, "Oakwood chief accused of tampering with evidence." The mayor called an emergency meeting. James attended calmly, his presence steady even under fire. The mayor leaned forward. "Chief Harlan, this department is a disaster. You've got civil unrest, officer resignations, and media chaos. You need to contain this." "I'm not containing the truth," James replied. "I'm confronting it." The mayor sighed. "You're idealistic, James, but you're putting the city at risk." "The city was at risk long before I got here," James said quietly. "I'm just the first one willing to admit it." Outside, protests escalated. The line between justice and chaos blurred. Some demonstrators threw bottles, others prayed. Reporters swarmed officers for interviews, and every word spoken was twisted into fuel for another headline. Meanwhile, Tyrone received an anonymous message, an audio file labeled, "Listen before it's too late." When he played it, he froze. It was Lisa and Thompson, recorded in a parking lot. Lisa's voice was cold. "If Harlan won't back down, we'll force his hand. I can make it look like he drew a gun on someone. A fake threat report, just enough to get him suspended." Tyrone ran to James's office. "Chief, they're planning something worse. They want to stage an incident, make it look like you threatened someone." James took a deep breath. "Then we expose them before they move, with Jamal's help. They set up a secure line to send the recovered files directly to the federal investigator, Agent Ruiz." Hours later, Ruiz confirmed receipt. "We've got enough to open criminal charges. Chief, keep yourself protected. They're desperate now." But as night fell, desperation turned to danger. Lisa cornered Tyrone in the parking lot, her tone venomous. "You just can't keep your mouth shut. Can you?" He turned, facing her squarely. "You're finished. Lisa, the feds have everything." She smiled darkly. "Not if you're gone first." Before Tyrone could react, one of her loyal officers lunged forward, shoving him hard. The struggle drew attention. Other officers ran toward the commotion. Lisa hissed, "This isn't over," before slipping into her car and speeding off. Later that night, Tyrone showed up at James's door, a bruise forming on his cheek. "She knows the investigation's real now," he said, breathing heavily. "They'll do anything to stop you." James looked at him with quiet resolve. "Then we do what's right, no matter the cost." He turned toward the window, watching the crowd outside chanting his name. The lights from the media vans glowed like 1,000 watchful eyes. The truth was now bigger than Oakwood. It had become a symbol. And as the night deepened, James whispered to himself, they tried to bury the truth, but all they did was plant a seed. He knew what would come next: retaliation, exposure, and the final reckoning. The storm was no longer approaching. It had arrived. The night began with sirens. Oakwood was no longer a city on edge. It was a city in chaos. The protests outside the precinct had grown into a sea of shouting voices, flashing lights, and clenched fists. Inside, James Harlan stood in his office, the blinds half drawn, watching as hundreds gathered beyond the barricades. He knew something terrible was coming. He could feel it in the air. The lies, the corruption, the hatred he had unearthed. It was all about to boil over, and at the center of it stood the man who refused to surrender. At 7:42 p.m., Detective Jamal Kendrick burst into the office, breathing hard. "Chief, we've got a situation," he said. "Sergeant Thompson's been spotted near the old maintenance yard on Jefferson Avenue. He's armed, off duty, and ranting on the police radio. He's saying you're a traitor and he's coming for you." James's eyes hardened. "Is anyone with him? 12 officers have refused to respond to dispatch. I think he's got help," Jamal said. "And Chief, Lisa Grant filed a threat report 30 minutes ago. Against you. She claims you pulled a gun on her." James clenched his jaw. "So that's their move. They're trying to end it tonight." He grabbed his jacket, his badge glinting under the fluorescent light, and turned to Jamal. "Call Tyrone. Tell him to meet me at Jefferson, and don't tell the rest of the precinct. We don't know who we can trust anymore. Outside." The chants of the crowd grew louder as James stepped through the rear exit, slipping into an unmarked car. His thoughts were calm but sharp. Memories flashing of that night years ago, when he was a scared 16-year-old boy pinned against a squad car, accused of something he didn't do. Tonight, the same injustice was circling back. But this time, He wasn't the victim. He was the law. When James arrived at the maintenance yard, the lights were off. Only the red glow of a single cruiser illuminated the cracked concrete. Tyrone's car was parked nearby. Empty. "Tyrone," James called out, his voice echoing against the metal walls. From the shadows came Thompson's voice, rough and trembling with rage. "You ruined everything, Harlan. 25 years I gave this department, and you turned it into a circus." James stepped closer, hands open, unarmed. "You ruined it yourself. Mike, you let hate rot your soul until you couldn't tell right from wrong." "Don't talk to me about right and wrong," Thompson shouted. "You humiliated me. You destroyed my reputation." "You did that when you spit on a man in need," James said, his tone calm but cutting. "And that man was me." There was silence, then the sound of a gun cocking. "You think you're better than me?" Thompson growled. "You're just another politician in uniform." Before James could respond, headlights flared behind him. Tyrone's SUV screeched into the lot. He jumped out, weapon drawn but lowered. "Mike, put the gun down," he shouted. Thompson swung the barrel toward Tyrone. "You too. Brooks? You're siding with him? After everything we went through?" "I'm siding with justice," Tyrone said, stepping closer. "You were my brother once, Mike, but this isn't you." Thompson's hands shook for a moment. He looked almost human, broken, lost. But then he shouted, "You don't know what it's like to be replaced, to watch your city fall apart while people like him get to preach reform from an office." James took one more step forward. "You're not losing your city, Mike. You're losing your soul." The next few seconds blurred into chaos. A gunshot cracked through the night, echoing across the yard. Tyrone stumbled back. Clutching his shoulder, Jamal's car screeched in from the main road, and he jumped out, returning fire into the air. Officers from downtown were already en route, sirens screaming in the distance. Thompson backed toward a stack of shipping crates, his breathing ragged. "You think you can arrest me?" he yelled. "You think anyone will believe you after what I've leaked?" James stepped forward, unflinching. "You can lie all you want. Mike, the truth already left your control." Thompson's face twisted with desperation. He raised his gun again, but this time, a young voice broke through the chaos. "Stop!" Everyone turned. Standing at the edge of the yard was Malik, the 12-year-old boy who'd been at the protests every day, holding his cardboard sign. His small frame shook, but his voice carried strength beyond his years. "You hurt my dad. You lied about him. And you almost broke this city. Please, just stop." Thompson froze, gun trembling in his hand. For the first time, shame flickered in his eyes. "Kid, you don't understand." "No," Malik interrupted. "You don't. My dad's still scared to walk down our street because of you. But Chief Harlan, he's trying to make things right." The sound of Malik's voice pierced something deep in Thompson's chest, a truth he'd buried long ago. He lowered the gun slightly, eyes wet. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he whispered. James took the chance, walking forward slowly. "Then end it now. Mike, don't make this your legacy. For a moment." Time seemed to stand still. The wind carried the faint hum of sirens growing closer. Then, with a trembling sigh, Thompson dropped the gun. It hit the ground with a dull clatter. Officers rushed in moments later, shouting orders. Jamal secured Thompson in handcuffs while paramedics tended to Tyrone's wound. As they lifted Tyrone into the ambulance, James knelt beside him. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Tyrone managed a faint smile through the pain. "Just returning the favor." "Chief," news spread within minutes. The armed standoff, the confession, the recording, everything hit the airwaves. The leaked threat report was exposed as fake, and federal agents confirmed the evidence Jamal had recovered. Overnight, the narrative flipped. The city that had doubted James now saw him as the man who had faced corruption head-on and refused to back down. Thompson was led away in cuffs, his head bowed, reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs lit up the night. But James said nothing. He simply stood under the glow of the streetlights, the weight of 6 months of struggle finally pressing down. Malik ran up to him, holding his sign, the one that read, "Justice lives here." James placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You were brave tonight," he said softly. Malik looked up. "You didn't give up, so neither will we." That night, Oakwood changed. The lies had been exposed, the poison drawn out. But James knew the work wasn't done. Reform wasn't a victory you celebrated once. It was a promise you kept every day. As the last news van left the scene, Tyrone's words echoed in his mind. "You're making enemies with power." James looked up at the night sky, the sirens fading into quiet. Then power's been warned. He murmured. He turned toward the precinct lights in the distance, ready to face whatever came next, because in the war for justice, the first victory was only the beginning. The morning after the standoff, Oakwood woke to a city transformed. The images of Sergeant Mike Thompson in handcuffs, led away under flashing lights, dominated every channel. Reporters called it the night Oakwood faced itself. Some praised Chief James Harlan as a hero who restored integrity to the badge. Others painted him as the man who dismantled the old guard. But for James, there was no victory parade, no triumph, only silence. Reform, he realized, was never loud. It was the quiet rebuilding that came after the storm, within 24 hours. The federal investigation confirmed what James had already known. Thompson and Lisa Grant had fabricated documents, deleted internal files, and obstructed justice. The Justice Department released an official statement citing severe ethical breaches within Oakwood PD, placing the precinct under federal supervision for 90 days. Lisa Grant resigned before charges could be filed, leaving behind a resignation letter filled with excuses and no remorse. Thompson, meanwhile, faced a $150,000 civil lawsuit from the Collins family. His marriage collapsed, and his house went up for sale. He left Oakwood a broken man, not because of James, but because of the truth he had tried to bury. In the days that followed, James refused interviews. He spent his time walking through the precinct halls, greeting officers one by one, rebuilding what had been shattered. Some met his eyes with respect, others with unease. Trust, he knew, could not be ordered. It had to be earned. So he started small. He created the Oakwood Accountability Initiative, mandating monthly community briefings and inviting residents to speak directly to officers. He implemented a peer review system and began new anti-bias training led by Lieutenant Elena Vargas and young Detective Jamal Kendrick. Slowly, the walls of division began to crumble. At first, attendance at the community meetings was sparse, just a handful of weary citizens sitting in folding chairs. But one evening, a familiar face appeared. Malik, the 12-year-old boy whose courage had stopped Thompson's gun. He sat in the front row, wearing his school jacket and holding a drawing folded in his hand. When James recognized him, he smiled. "Glad you came." "Malik." The boy nodded shyly. "I wanted to see if the cops are different now." James chuckled softly. "That's a fair question. What do you think?" Malik looked around the room, at the diverse group of officers listening quietly, at Vargas writing down notes, at Jamal shaking hands with residents. He finally said, "It looks better than before." James smiled. "That's all I need to hear." Over the next month, Oakwood began to heal. Complaint rates dropped. Community trust rose from 28% to 52%. Crime fell, not because of harsher policing, but because people started cooperating again, Reporters who once criticized James began calling him the reformer who rebuilt Oakwood from the inside. But he didn't bask in the praise. He knew the work was fragile, like glass. One misstep, and it could all shatter again. Tyrone Brooks returned to duty after recovering from his shoulder wound, when he entered James's office for the first time since the shooting. The two men shared a silent moment of mutual respect. "You were right," Tyrone said quietly. "You can't fix a broken house by painting over the cracks. You have to tear out the rot." James leaned back, smiling faintly. "You helped me do it, my friend, but even in success, scars remained. Some officers still whispered behind closed doors, bitter about the reforms and resentful of James's leadership. One afternoon, he received a letter from Thompson, mailed from a halfway house outside Chicago. The handwriting was shaky. "I've lost everything." It read, "My job, my family, my name, but maybe it's what I deserved. I saw your press conference. You said justice means facing yourself. I think I'm finally doing that. If you can forgive me, do it for your own peace, not mine." James folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer, and stared out the window for a long time. Forgiveness didn't erase what had happened, but it did loosen the weight that had hung on his heart. Weeks later, during a town hall meeting, James took the stage to announce the next step in reform: the creation of the Oakwood Community Partnership Fund, financed by the city's police budget surplus, designed to support families affected by police misconduct. He ended his speech with quiet conviction. "Justice isn't a finish line, it's a daily choice, and we're choosing it, together." That evening, as the sun set behind the precinct, Malik approached him again, handing him the drawing he'd carried for weeks. It showed two hands, one dark, one light, clasped together over the words, "Justice lives here." James held it with care, his throat tightening. "This belongs on the wall," he said softly. He hung the drawing in the main hallway of the precinct the next morning, right above the words etched into the marble, "To serve, not to rule." Officers passed it daily, some pausing, some pretending not to notice. But little by little, it became a symbol, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been reclaimed. For the first time in years, Oakwood felt like a community again. The fear was still there, but so was hope. And as James walked through the precinct that night, the hum of quiet conversation replaced the sound of hostility. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was real. He stopped by Tyrone's desk and said, "We've still got work to do." Tyrone smiled. "Then let's get to it." And for the first time since taking the job, James allowed himself to believe. Maybe, just maybe, the city he once feared could finally become the city he'd always dreamed it could be. 6 months had passed since the night that nearly tore Oakwood apart. The city had changed, not through speeches or headlines, but through small, steady acts of courage. The precinct that once carried the stench of mistrust now pulsed with quiet determination. Officers who once mocked the word reform now sat through mentorship sessions with new recruits, teaching compassion before command. Community members who once crossed the street to avoid the police now stopped to talk, even smile. The transformation wasn't perfect, but it was real, and at the center of it all stood Chief James Harlan, the man who refused to let hate define his department. On a bright morning in December, James walked into the Oakwood Community Park, where a small stage had been set up for the Unity Day ceremony. It was the first public event jointly hosted by the police department and local residents since the scandal. Families gathered under the winter sun. Children played near the fountain, and banners read, "Oakwood United, a new beginning." Reporters were there too. But this time, their cameras didn't seek scandal. They captured healing. Lieutenant Elena Vargas approached James with a smile. "You did it," she said quietly. We're not just surviving anymore. We're rebuilding. James smiled faintly. No, he replied. Looking around at the crowd, we did it. Every single one of us who decided to change instead of complain. A cheer rose from the stage as Detective Jamal Kendrick called for attention. The young detective, once the department's quiet rookie, now stood tall and confident behind the microphone. 6 months ago, Oakwood was divided. He said, "Today, we stand together, not as cops and civilians, but as neighbors." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was warm, heartfelt. For once, unity didn't feel like a slogan. It felt like truth. As the ceremony continued, James noticed Malik sitting near the front row, holding a framed photo of his late father. When the boy saw him, he waved, grinning. James walked over, crouched beside him, and smiled. "That's a strong picture you've got there," he said softly. Malik nodded. "Mom says he'd be proud of what you did, and I am too." James swallowed hard. "Thank you, son. But you're the one who showed courage that night. You stopped a man from losing himself." The boy looked up. "You stopped a whole city from losing itself." A few feet away, Tyrone Brooks stood with his family, his arm still bearing a faint scar from the gunshot. He caught James's eye and gave him a nod, the kind that carried the weight of everything they'd endured together. Lisa Grant was gone. Thompson was serving time in state custody, and the department had been cleared of federal supervision. The past was still there, but it no longer ruled their present. When it was James's turn to speak, the crowd quieted. He stepped up to the microphone, adjusting it slightly before looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, all hopeful. 6 months ago, he began, we stood on opposite sides of fear. Officers were afraid to act, citizens were afraid to trust, and our city was bleeding from wounds no one wanted to see. But healing doesn't start with denial. It starts with truth. He paused, letting his words settle. We faced the truth. About corruption, about prejudice, about our own failures. And from that truth came something stronger than fear. Accountability. That's what justice really is. Not revenge, not pride, but responsibility. The crowd nodded silently. A few people wiped their eyes. James continued, his voice calm but resolute. Today, I'm proud to announce the Oakwood Integrity Fund, a permanent program to support victims of police misconduct and provide scholarships for young people who want to serve their communities the right way. And this initiative isn't about forgiveness. It's about progress, about ensuring no one else goes through what we went through. The applause that followed rolled like a wave through the park. Malik stood up, clapping with both hands, his face shining with pride after the ceremony. As the sun dipped low and the crowd began to disperse, James lingered near the stage, watching families laugh and officers mingle with residents. Tyrone walked up beside him, hands in his coat pockets. "Never thought I'd see this day," he said quietly. "Neither did I," James admitted. "But maybe that's the point. Real change always starts as something you don't believe can happen." They stood there for a moment, the hum of the city blending with the soft laughter of children nearby. For the first time in decades, Oakwood felt alive again before leaving. Malik ran up to James one last time. "Chief, I almost forgot," he said, handing him a small wrapped gift. "It's for you." James opened it carefully. Inside was a framed drawing, 2 figures shaking hands in front of a sunrise, with the words, "Justice is hard, but worth fighting for" written beneath. His eyes softened. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. Malik grinned. "It's you and Officer Brooks. Mom helped me with the colors." James smiled, touched beyond words. "You've got talent. Kid, one day, You'll tell this story better than I ever could." As the boy ran off, James stood for a while, watching the golden light fade across the park. The world hadn't become perfect. Injustice still lived beyond Oakwood's borders, but this city had proven that progress was possible. And that, he thought, was worth every scar, every sleepless night, every battle. He turned to leave, his badge catching the last glimmer of sunlight in his heart. He knew that justice wasn't something he enforced. It was something he lived. And as the evening breeze swept through the park, carrying the sound of laughter and distant sirens, James Harlan walked forward, ready for whatever fight came next, because justice, like dawn, would always rise again. Thank you for watching Justice Rising, a chief's battle for reform. If you believe in justice and truth, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. See you in the next story, where light always defeats the darkness.